the battle that begins inside the heart. James once wrote words that many read, but few truly understand. Words so simple that they sound almost harmless, yet so deep that they explain the entire human struggle. He said, "But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death." James 1:14-15. These words are not poetry. They are a diagnosis. They are not meant to condemn, but to awaken. James is not pointing fingers at the world, at demons or at other people. He is pointing inward. He is saying that the greatest battlefield you will ever face is not outside of you, but within you. And the greatest enemy is not temptation itself, but the unchecked desires that quietly grow in the heart when no one is watching. Most people misunderstand sin. They imagine it as a sudden, dramatic act, a moment of weakness, a visible fall, a public failure. But James reveals something far more unsettling. Sin does not begin with action. It begins with desire, a thought entertained too long, a feeling justified instead of questioned, a whisper that sounds reasonable, a longing that feels harmless. That is where the process starts, and that is why so many people fall without even realizing when it happened. They think the problem began when the action occurred, but in truth, the seed was planted long before. The flesh, as Scripture describes it, is not merely the body. It is the part of us that wants control, comfort, validation, pleasure, and immediate satisfaction. It is the voice that says, "You deserve this. You've been through enough. No one will know. Just this once." The flesh does not scream. It whispers. It speaks in a tone that feels like your own voice. And that is what makes it dangerous, because when temptation comes from outside, we recognize it. But when it comes from within, we often call it instinct, intuition, or even need. James explains that desire conceives. That word is important. Conception is not instant birth. It is a process. It requires time, attention, and nourishment. Desire becomes stronger the more it is fed. The more you imagine it, justify it, revisit it, and eventually, if left unchecked, it gives birth to sin. Not because God wanted it to, not because you were doomed, but because nothing interrupted the process. No resistance, no prayer, no awareness, no decision to walk away while you still could. And here is the part most people don't want to hear. Sin always promises life, but it delivers death, not always physical death, sometimes emotional death, spiritual numbness, loss of peace, loss of clarity, loss of connection with God, loss of self-respect. Relationships decay, purpose becomes blurry, joy fades, and yet people keep returning to the same patterns, wondering why they feel empty, anxious, or disconnected from God. James is not trying to scare the reader, he is trying to save them. He is saying, pay attention to the beginning, because if you catch the process early, you can stop the outcome. The moment you recognize a desire pulling you away from truth, that is the moment you still have power. Once desire becomes action, the damage has already begun. But before that moment, you are still standing at the door. This is why spiritual life is not about perfection, but awareness. The strongest believers are not those who never feel temptation. They are the ones who recognize it quickly and respond wisely. Even Jesus was tempted. The difference is that he did not negotiate with temptation. He did not entertain it. He answered it with truth. He cut it off at the root. Many people today feel tired, confused, spiritually dry, and disconnected from God, and they don't understand why. They pray, they believe, they listen to sermons, but they ignore the small compromises, the little thoughts they allow, the emotions they indulge, the habits they excuse. James is telling us that these small things are not small, they are seeds, and seeds, when watered, always grow. There is a silent war happening in every human heart, a war between the flesh and the spirit. One pulls you toward comfort, pleasure, and control. The other calls you toward discipline, surrender, and trust. The flesh promises relief, the spirit promises life, and every single day you choose which voice to follow. This is why some people feel stuck in cycles they can't break. They fight the behavior but not the desire. They try to stop the fruit without addressing the root. But James makes it clear, the root is desire. And desire must be confronted with truth, not willpower alone. When you begin to understand this, everything changes. You stop blaming circumstances. You stop blaming people. You stop asking why life is so hard. And instead, you begin to ask the right question. What am I allowing to grow inside me? Because whatever you allow to grow will eventually shape your life. This is not a message of condemnation. It is a message of clarity. God is not standing over you with punishment. He is standing beside you with wisdom, warning you before the fall happens. He is saying, pay attention to your inner world. Guard your heart. Be honest with yourself. Don't play with what can destroy you. And here is the beautiful part. If desire can give birth to sin, then righteous desire can give birth to life. When you desire truth, peace, self-control, humility, and connection with God, those desires also grow, they also mature, and they also produce fruit. The difference is that their fruit brings life instead of death. This is where transformation begins, not with fear, not with guilt, but with awareness, with the courage to look inward and say, I see what's happening, and I choose a different path. How the flesh disguises itself as reason and emotion. If the flesh were obvious, no one would fall. If temptation arrived screaming, announcing destruction, most people would run. But the flesh is subtle. It does not appear as an enemy. It presents itself as logic, emotion, survival, even self-care. This is why James's words are so powerful. He does not say that sin begins with rebellion. He says it begins with desire, and desire rarely looks dangerous at first. The flesh knows how to speak your language. It studies your fears, your wounds, your unmet needs. It waits for moments of weakness, loneliness, exhaustion, disappointment, rejection, and then it whispers something that sounds reasonable. You've had a hard day. You deserve comfort. This won't hurt anyone. God understands. Just this once. And because the voice feels familiar, because it sounds like your own thoughts, you accept it without resistance. This is where many believers become confused. They think temptation must feel dark or evil, but most of the time it feels justified. It feels emotional. It feels logical. It even feels necessary, and that is what makes it dangerous. The flesh does not push you off a cliff. It slowly leads you downhill, step by step, until you don't recognize how far you've gone. James is exposing a pattern that repeats itself in every human life. First comes desire, then imagination, then justification, then action, and finally, consequence. But the enemy never shows you the final step. He only shows you the first one. He never says, this will cost you your peace, your joy, your spiritual clarity. He says, this will make you feel better right now. And here is something many people don't realize. The flesh does not always lead you into obvious sin. Sometimes it leads you into distraction, into comfort, into laziness, into emotional numbness, into spiritual apathy. You stop praying as deeply, you stop reflecting, you stop listening, not because you rejected God, but because you became slowly disconnected. And that disconnection is just as dangerous. The flesh loves extremes, either indulgence or avoidance, either obsession or numbness, rarely balance, rarely discipline, rarely patience. And when you live according to the flesh, your emotions begin to control you instead of guiding you. You react instead of choosing. You chase relief instead of growth. You seek escape instead of transformation. James is teaching something that psychology would only later confirm. Unchecked desire grows stronger with repetition. The more you give in, the more power it gains. What once felt optional begins to feel necessary. What once felt wrong begins to feel normal. And eventually, what once bothered your conscience no longer moves you at all. This is how spiritual sensitivity dies, not suddenly, gradually. And yet many people ask, why do I feel so far from God? Why don't I feel His presence anymore? Why do I feel empty? The answer is often uncomfortable, because the flesh has been leading for too long, not through rebellion, but through quiet permission. The flesh also knows how to disguise itself as emotion. It tells you that your feelings define truth, that if something feels right, it must be right. That if something feels unfair, you are justified in responding however you want. But Scripture teaches the opposite. Feelings are real, but they are not rulers. They are signals, not authorities. James understood this deeply. That's why he didn't say temptation comes from Satan alone. He said it comes from within, from our own desires. That doesn't mean God abandons us. It means God gives us responsibility, the responsibility to watch our inner life, to guard what we entertain, to examine what we allow to grow. There is a reason why Scripture constantly speaks about vigilance. Guard your heart. Be sober-minded. Watch and pray. These are not religious cliches. They are survival instructions, because the moment you stop paying attention, the flesh steps in and begins to lead. But here is the hope. Awareness changes everything. The moment you recognize the voice of the flesh, it loses power. The moment you pause instead of reacting, you regain control. The moment you bring your thoughts into the light, they lose their grip. This is why prayer is not just asking God for things. It is alignment. It is recalibration. It is returning your attention to what is true. When you pray, you interrupt the cycle. You slow down the process James describes. You stop desire from conceiving. And this is why silence is powerful, because in silence you begin to hear what is really happening inside you. You begin to notice the patterns, the triggers, the excuses, and once you see them, you are no longer a victim of them. God is not asking you to be perfect. He is asking you to be aware, to be honest, to be willing to confront what is growing inside you before it grows into something destructive. The inner war and what the Bible reveals about it. The Bible never hides the reality of the inner war. From the very beginning, Scripture reveals that the greatest conflicts of humanity are not fought on battlefields, but inside the heart. James exposes this truth with clarity, but he is not alone. The entire Bible echoes the same message. The real struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against what tries to rule the human soul. Paul explains this conflict in one of the most honest passages ever written about the human condition. In Romans 7:19 he says, "For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do. This I keep on doing." This is not the confession of a weak man. This is the confession of someone who understands the battle, someone who recognizes that there is a force inside pulling in the opposite direction of what the Spirit desires. This inattention is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that you are aware. Those who feel no struggle have usually surrendered without realizing it. The war only exists because something inside you still wants what is right. James teaches that desire is the starting point. Paul explains what happens when that desire is left unchecked. The flesh begins to dominate the will, and when the flesh dominates, it reshapes how you think, how you react, and even how you interpret reality. That is why Scripture constantly warns about the mind. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Above all else guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." Everything. Your words, your reactions, your habits, your choices, your destiny. The heart, in biblical language, represents the center of your thoughts, desires, and intentions. If the heart is unguarded, everything else eventually collapses. Jesus himself spoke directly about this. In Matthew 15:19, he said, "For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander." Notice something important. He did not say these things come from the world. He said they come from within. That does not mean humans are evil by nature, but it means the heart must be guided, not left alone. The flesh thrives in spiritual neglect. When prayer fades, when reflection stops, when scripture is ignored, the flesh slowly takes the throne. Not with noise, with comfort, with distraction, with emotional reasoning, with excuses that sound harmless. The Bible describes this process clearly in Galatians 5:16-17. "So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh." This verse reveals something crucial. The flesh and the Spirit are always in opposition. There is no neutral ground. You are always being led by one or the other. Many people think spiritual growth means never feeling temptation again. But Scripture shows the opposite. Growth means recognizing temptation quickly and choosing not to follow it. Even Jesus was tempted in the wilderness, but he responded with truth, not emotion, with Scripture, not impulse, with obedience, not negotiation. And this is where many believers struggle today. They try to fight spiritual battles with emotional strength instead of spiritual discipline. They rely on motivation instead of truth. But emotions change, feelings fade, truth remains. James is warning us that sin is not an accident. It is a process, a chain reaction. Desire leads to action, action leads to consequence. But what he also implies is that the chain can be broken, not at the end, but at the beginning. This is why Scripture emphasizes renewing the mind. Romans 12:2 says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Transformation does not start with behavior. It starts with perception, with how you think, with what you allow into your mind daily, what you watch, what you listen to, what you dwell on, what you rehearse mentally. These things are not neutral. They shape desire, and desire shapes direction. The flesh loves repetition. It wants habits that require no thought, no resistance, no discipline. But the Spirit invites awareness, stillness, conscious choice. That is why silence can feel uncomfortable at first. Because in silence, the noise of the flesh becomes obvious. And yet, that discomfort is a gift. Because once you see the pattern, you can interrupt it. Once you recognize the voice, you can refuse to follow it. Once you understand the process, you are no longer trapped by it. This is why James's words are so powerful. He is not condemning, he is explaining. He is saying, pay attention. This is how it happens. This is how it grows. And this is how it destroys. But behind the warning is an invitation. Choose differently. God does not ask you to fight alone. He does not expect perfection. He asks for awareness, humility, and willingness to be led. The Spirit is always present, always guiding, always warning. The question is whether you are listening. How this battle plays out in daily life without you realizing it. Most people imagine temptation as something dramatic, a big decision, a visible mistake, a moment of collapse. But in real life, the battle James describes happens quietly, in ordinary moments, in thoughts no one else hears, in choices so small they seem insignificant. And that is exactly why they are so powerful. It begins when you wake up tired and already irritated. Nothing bad has happened yet, but your mind is heavy. The flesh whispers, "You don't have energy today. Just get through the day." Prayer feels optional. Gratitude feels forced. You scroll your phone instead of centering yourself. That choice seems harmless, but it sets the tone. Your spirit becomes quiet and your emotions take the lead. Then something small happens. Someone speaks to you in a tone you don't like. A message goes unanswered. A plan fails. And suddenly irritation rises. Not rage, just irritation. You replay the situation in your head. You justify your reaction. You feel wronged. This is where James' words become real. Desire begins forming, not desire for pleasure, but desire for validation, for control, for self-defense. You don't explode, you just hold it inside. You start building a story in your mind. They always do this. No one respects me. I'm tired of being the bigger person. And without realizing it, your heart is moving away from peace. The flesh is working, not loudly, but efficiently. Later that day, you seek comfort. Maybe it's food, maybe it's entertainment, maybe it's social media, maybe it's someone who gives you attention. The act itself doesn't look sinful, but the motivation behind it matters. You are no longer seeking peace, you are seeking escape. And James would say, this is where desire is being fed. This is how sin often begins, not with rebellion, but with avoidance. Avoiding discomfort, avoiding silence, avoiding self-reflection, avoiding God's voice. The Bible gives countless examples of this pattern. Think of David. He didn't fall into sin when he met Bathsheba. The fall began earlier, when he stayed home from battle while others went to fight. 2 Samuel 11. One tells us that when kings go off to war, David remained in Jerusalem. That small decision opened the door. Idleness became opportunity. Opportunity became desire. Desire became action. Action brought consequences that affected generations. Or consider Cain. God warned him before he acted. In Genesis 4:7, God says, "Sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." That verse reveals something powerful. Sin waits. It watches. It looks for moments of emotional vulnerability. And God's warning was clear. You are not powerless, but you must be aware. In modern life, this looks like emotional reactions that go unchecked. You feel disrespected, so you speak harshly. You feel lonely, so you attach yourself to the wrong person. You feel frustrated, so you escape into distractions. You feel empty, so you chase pleasure. And slowly, without realizing it, your inner world becomes restless, heavy, and confused. James is trying to wake us up to this cycle. He is saying, don't wait until the consequences show up. Pay attention to the beginning, because the beginning always feels harmless. Even spiritually, this happens. You stop reading scripture regularly. You stop praying deeply. You tell yourself you're just busy. But then your thoughts become more negative. Your patience shortens. Your compassion fades. You become more reactive, more defensive, more anxious, and you wonder why you don't feel God's presence anymore. The truth is, nothing dramatic happened. You simply stopped feeding the Spirit and began feeding the flesh. Jesus warned about this in Matthew 26:41, when he said, "Watch and pray, so that you will not fall into temptation. The Spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." He didn't say the Spirit is absent. He said it is willing. That means your spirit desires good, but it needs support. It needs attention. It needs discipline. Daily life is where this battle is won or lost, not in big moments, but in small ones. In what you think about while driving, in how you respond when no one is watching, in what you do when you feel bored, stressed, or unappreciated. The flesh thrives in autopilot mode. The spirit requires awareness. And here is the part most people miss. The flesh is not always about doing bad things. Sometimes it is about avoiding good ones, avoiding growth, avoiding responsibility, avoiding uncomfortable truths, avoiding silence where God might speak. This is why so many people feel stuck, even though nothing bad is happening in their lives. They are not moving forward because the flesh has made comfort feel safer than transformation. But James's message is not hopeless. It is actually empowering, because if desire leads to sin, then redirected desire can lead to life. If habits shape outcomes, then new habits can reshape destiny. If awareness breaks the cycle, then awareness is the first step toward freedom. How to break the cycle and regain control of the inner life. At some point, every person reaches a moment of awareness, a moment when they realize that something inside them has been quietly shaping their life, not loudly, not violently, but consistently. And that realization can be uncomfortable because it forces an honest question. Who has really been in control, my spirit or my impulses? James does not leave us trapped in diagnosis. He offers understanding so that transformation becomes possible. Because once you recognize the pattern, you are no longer a prisoner of it. The power of sin is not only in action, but in ignorance. When you see clearly, its grip weakens. The first step to breaking the cycle is awareness without shame. Many people try to change through guilt, but guilt only feeds the flesh. Shame says, you are broken. God's voice says, you are aware, and now you can choose differently. That difference is everything. The Bible never tells us to hate ourselves. It tells us to deny the flesh. And those are not the same thing. Denying the flesh is not self-punishment. It is self-mastery. It is choosing not to be ruled by every thought, impulse, or emotion that passes through the mind. Jesus said something deeply revealing in Luke 9:23. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. Notice the word daily. This is not a one-time decision. It is a practice, a rhythm, a continual return to awareness. In daily life, this means pausing before reacting. It means questioning your own thoughts instead of automatically believing them. It means asking, is this leading me toward peace or pulling me into chaos? That pause alone can break the cycle James describes, because desire loses power when it is observed instead of obeyed. One of the most practical ways to do this is through stillness. Silence is uncomfortable because it exposes what we normally drown out with noise, but silence is where clarity returns. Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." Not be busy, not be distracted, be still, because stillness reveals what is really happening inside you. When you slow down, you begin to notice patterns. You notice how certain thoughts always lead to anxiety, how certain habits leave you feeling empty, how certain environments pull you away from peace. This awareness is not meant to judge you. It is meant to free you. Another powerful tool is replacing rather than resisting. The flesh grows stronger when you only try to suppress it, but it weakens when you redirect your focus. This is why Paul writes in Philippians 4:8, "Whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, think about such things." He doesn't say stop thinking. He says, change what you feed your mind. You cannot starve the flesh by force alone, but you can starve it by feeding the spirit. This happens through small, consistent choices, choosing reflection over reaction, choosing prayer over complaint, choosing patience over impulse, choosing silence over noise. These choices may feel insignificant, but they accumulate, and over time, they reshape your inner world. The flesh thrives on immediacy. The spirit works through patience. That's why growth often feels slow. But slow growth is stable growth. It builds depth. It builds resilience. It builds clarity. And something remarkable happens when you begin living this way. Your desires begin to change. What once tempted you loses its power. What once felt boring begins to feel peaceful. What once felt difficult begins to feel natural. This is not suppression. This is transformation. Paul describes this beautifully in Galatians 5:22-23 when he speaks of the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. These are not forced behaviors. They are results. They grow naturally when the Spirit leads. And this is the key truth James wants us to understand. You do not overcome sin by fighting harder. You overcome it by feeding something stronger. When the Spirit leads, the flesh weakens. When awareness grows, impulse shrinks. When truth becomes your anchor, temptation loses its voice. You will still feel desire. You will still face moments of struggle, but they will no longer control you. You will recognize them, and recognition is power. Powerful and practical ways to live above the flesh in today's world. The world we live in today is louder, faster, and more distracting than ever before. People are overwhelmed by information, stimulation, pressure, comparison, and emotional exhaustion. And in this environment, the flesh finds endless opportunities to grow. That is why living according to the Spirit today requires intention, clarity, and discipline. Not perfection, but direction. James's message is more relevant now than it has ever been. Because modern life constantly feeds desire. Everything is designed to stimulate, to excite, to promise comfort, pleasure, or escape. But almost nothing teaches restraint, silence, or inner mastery. So how do you live differently? How do you apply these truths in real life, not just in theory? The first powerful step is learning to pause before you react. This may sound simple, but it is revolutionary. Most damage happens not because of what we feel, but because of how quickly we respond to what we feel. The moment you feel anger rising, desire intensifying, or anxiety tightening your chest, pause. Take one breath, then another. That pause interrupts the chain James described. It creates space between impulse and action. Proverbs 16:32 says, "Better a patient person than a warrior, one with self-control than one who takes a city." In today's world, self-control is true power. Not dominance, not loudness, not force. The ability to remain calm when emotions demand reaction is a spiritual strength few develop, but all can learn. Another powerful practice is daily self-examination. Not in a harsh way, but in an honest one. At the end of the day, ask yourself simple questions. What drained me today? What stirred my emotions? When did I feel disconnected? When did I feel at peace? These questions reveal patterns, and patterns reveal where the flesh is trying to lead. This is exactly what Psalm 139:23-24 invites us to do. "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me, and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." This is not fear-based reflection. It is alignment. Another practical step is learning to guard what enters your mind, what you watch, what you listen to, what you consume daily. Your mind is not neutral ground. It absorbs what you feed it. If you constantly feed it chaos, comparison, fear, and noise, your inner life will reflect that. You don't need to isolate yourself from the world, but you do need to be selective. Ask yourself, does this content bring me closer to peace or pull me into restlessness? Does it strengthen my character or weaken my focus? Does it feed my spirit or stimulate my flesh? Jesus said in Matthew 6:22, "The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light." What you allow into your eyes and ears shapes your inner world more than you realize. Another powerful habit is learning to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. Most people run from discomfort immediately. They distract themselves, numb themselves, or fill the silence. But discomfort often carries information. It shows you where growth is needed, where healing must occur, where dependence on God is being formed. When you stop running from discomfort, you begin to develop spiritual endurance, and endurance changes you. Romans 5:3-4 says, Suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. The flesh hates discomfort. The Spirit uses it. Prayer also changes when you understand this battle. Prayer stops being a list of requests and becomes a place of alignment. You don't pray to change God. You pray to become aware of what is happening within you. You pray to regain clarity. You pray to listen. And one of the most powerful prayers you can pray is simple. God, help me see what I am feeding. That prayer alone can bring deep transformation. Another crucial step is choosing your influences carefully, the people you listen to, the voices you trust, the environments you place yourself in. Scripture says in 1 Corinthians 15:33, "Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character." This doesn't mean abandoning people. It means being aware of what influences your thinking, values, and reactions. If you surround yourself with constant negativity, drama, or cynicism, your inner world will reflect that. If you surround yourself with wisdom and calm and purpose, your spirit will grow stronger. And finally, one of the most powerful practices of all, consistency over intensity. You do not need extreme discipline for 1 week. You need gentle consistency over time. A few minutes of reflection daily, a moment of silence, a conscious choice to pause. These small actions compound. The flesh wants immediacy. The Spirit works through patience. And over time, something remarkable happens. You begin to feel lighter, calmer, more grounded. You react less. You observe more. You stop being controlled by every thought or emotion. You feel more present, more aware, more aligned. This is not because life becomes easier. It is because you become stronger internally. And this is the quiet power James was pointing to. Not perfection, not suppression, but awareness, discipline, and alignment with truth. From struggle to freedom, the life that emerges when the Spirit leads everything. James revealed leads to this moment, not fear, not guilt, not condemnation, but clarity. Because once you understand how the flesh works, how desire grows, how temptation forms, and how the Spirit gently invites you back to alignment, something inside you begins to change. You stop seeing life as a battle you are losing and begin to recognize it as a journey you are learning to navigate. The truth is, every person lives under the influence of something. Some live under fear, others under impulse, many under distraction. But those who awaken to this inner battle discover something powerful. They are not slaves to their thoughts, emotions, or habits. They are participants in their own transformation. James never wrote to shame the believer. He wrote to awaken them. He wanted people to understand that temptation does not define them, but how they respond to it does. He wanted them to see that sin is not a sudden fall, but a slow drift, and that drifting can always be interrupted. And here is the most important truth of all. God is not watching you with disappointment. He is walking with you in patience. Every moment of awareness is already a step toward healing. Every time you choose reflection over reaction, you are growing. Every time you pause instead of giving in, you are strengthening your spirit. This is why the Bible consistently emphasizes renewal, not perfection. Lamentations 3:22-23 reminds us, "Because of the Lord's great love we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning." Every day is a new beginning, not because yesterday didn't matter, but because grace is always greater than failure. When you begin living with this awareness, your relationship with yourself changes. You become less harsh, less reactive, more observant. You stop judging your thoughts and start understanding them. You stop fighting yourself and start guiding yourself. You realize that growth is not about eliminating struggle, but about learning how to walk through it with wisdom. And something beautiful happens when the Spirit begins to lead. Peace becomes more constant than chaos. Clarity replaces confusion. Purpose replaces restlessness. You begin to sense when something is pulling you away from who you are meant to be. And instead of falling into it, you step back. You start choosing differently. Not because you are afraid, but because you are aware. This is the freedom James was pointing to. Not freedom to do whatever you want, but freedom from being controlled by what you want. Freedom from impulses that once ruled you. Freedom from cycles that once trapped you. Freedom to live with intention, presence, and depth. And as this transformation takes place, others will notice. Not because you preach, not because you announce it, but because your presence changes. You respond differently. You carry yourself with more calm. You no longer react the way you used to. Your peace becomes visible. This is what it means to walk by the Spirit. Not to be perfect, not to be flawless, but to be awake. Awake to your thoughts. Awake to your choices. Awake to what you feed. Awake to what you allow to grow inside you. Because in the end, the message James gives us is not about sin. It is about life, about understanding how life works, about realizing that what you nurture within yourself will eventually shape your reality. And now, having walked through this truth, you are no longer unaware. You know where the battle begins. You know how it grows. You know how to interrupt it. And most importantly, you know that you are not alone in it. The Spirit is present, wisdom is available, and transformation is always possible. The question now is not what you know. The question is what you will choose, starting today.